Can't find no work, can't find no job, my friend. Money is tighter than it's ever been. Say, man, I just don't understand what's going on across this land. Ah, what's happening, brother? Yeah, what's happening? What's happening, my man?
Welcome to the Advocator Show. My name is Charlie H. Fisher III, and I'm your host for today. The Advocator Show is designed to bring awareness to the community about issues that affect society as a whole, as well as to highlight local businesses and talent coming out of West New York area. Justice for India. India was a young lady who allegedly died under suspicious circumstances while in the custodial care of the Erie County Holding Center in Buffalo, New York. The attorney representing her, Matthew Albert, is here today to tell her story. Stay tuned in. We'll be right back after this short break.
It began with her contacting the police asking for help because she was short of breath. Somehow that led to police arriving, and then allegedly, in the police officer's presence, her taking someone's car and leading the police on a chase before ultimately crashing the car. Again, these are accusations. There could be, obviously there might be something to them, but that's going to be under our investigation as well. We want to really take a holistic approach and also see, just for the family's peace of mind as much as anything else, but what happened leading up to the time she was in custody, just so we can really kind of get a feel for what she was going through and what ultimately led to her getting behind these bars in the first place.
So it's the family's thought that something happened in there, she was released, and then she died, basically. Is that the...
Well, I mean, essentially, but, the medicals show that, yeah, a lot of things happen in there. A lot of awful things. And when they say she was released, she was brain dead by the time that she left. By New York State law, that means when there's no irreversible brain damage and there's no brain activity, you are dead. So really, for all intents and purposes, in fact, legally speaking, she died behind those walls.
Welcome back to the Advocator Show. Again, my name is Charlie H. Fisher III. I'm your host for today. We're back with attorney Matthew Albert, who's representing the family of India Cummings, who died while in the custody and care of Erie County Holding Center, February 2016. Thank you for being here today, Mr. Albert.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about India Cummings, her age, where she grew up, went to school, her siblings, etc.
Certainly. Well, India would have been 28 this March 1st. She passed February 21st of this same year. She is a Rochester native, came to Buffalo sometime within the past year to start an LPN program to better her career. No criminal record whatsoever. Very popular in the Rochester community. I've had a tremendous amount of outreach. Big family in the Rochester area as well. And other than that, she was exceptional in many aspects until a mental illness beset her early in this year, February. And due to that, she was transported to the Erie County Holding Center on February 1st, after she had originally called the police for help, and then things just completely snowballed from there.
How did you hear about this incident, Counselor?
Well, originally, India's mother, Tawana Wyatt, had contacted me to represent India due to pending criminal charges from Lackawanna and then for other incidents that had allegedly taken place at the holding center. So I was retained on the matter in about February 15th, February 14th. And immediately the mother's primary concern was her daughter's mental state. She stated, for one, that the daughter's alleged conduct, India's conduct, was completely out of character in the sense that India was a kind, gentle, peaceful person. And in fact, the one characteristic that was most attributed to India from all the individuals I spoke with was just her gentle nature. So the conduct that was being attributed to her was completely out of character. And when Miss Wyatt had seen India in court, India had broken down, was incoherent. She was not accepting visitors at the holding center. So Miss Wyatt's primary concern was to get her daughter transferred to a hospital. So that was my original task. And to that end, we had convinced a Buffalo City Court judge, Judge Gibbons, to allow the transfer to take place. And this was on February 16th, where we got the green light to do that. We were in the process of working with the mental health professionals to get her a bed so that she could receive the psychiatric examinations and or treatment that that was so much needed at that point. Unfortunately, well, tragically, February 17th, we received a phone call from the holding center where she had been transported to Buffalo General Hospital, but by that time, she was brain dead, in cardiac arrest, and also presented at the hospital with very low kidney function, severe dehydration, a blood clot in her leg, and a litany of other highly disturbing and inexplicable injuries, given that she had presented at the holding center 2 or 3 weeks earlier in good physical health, although her mental health was obviously at question from the very beginning.
This is really riveted the community, and just from your legal insight, and of course you've been in practice for a number of years, was there anything about this and taking this case that really disturbed you? What would you say is the most significant, riveting thing that?
Well, when I was originally enlisted for this case, both her mother and I were highly concerned about India's mental state, but nothing could have possibly prepared us for what was taking place behind those walls in terms of the treatment and the neglect that clearly she was subject to at the holding center. And so I was working with the mom, and we were feverishly working to get her transported, but there was no way for us to know that her life was in jeopardy, only that she belonged at a hospital as opposed to a jail based upon her mental state. And then just seeing the mother's grief when we received the news, and then hearing all the injuries, one after another, that were being uncovered at Buffalo General, was just a complete shock to me. I've never seen anything quite like that in my years of practice, and of course the family was sufficiently devastated. And at that point, obviously my role had completely changed at that time from representing India in pending criminal charges to now attempting to get answers to the very difficult and unanswerable questions as to what happened to her at the holding center. Why did it happen? How could something like that happen? And then to work beyond that and try to get justice for India in the sense which really starts with accountability for the individuals that were responsible for her demise at the Erie County Holding Center.
In your career, have you ever handled a case like this before? Is this the first of a kind? I know nationally you hear other kind of issues. And in Erie County, the question of in custody deaths. But is this your first case of this nature?
I've had wrongful death cases before, but nothing quite parallel to what seems to have taken place with India Cummings. No, and thankfully I think this is, as horrific as this is, I don't think this is obviously the type of thing that happens all the time at the Erie County Holding Center. But what I can say from our investigations, from people we've spoken with, from really everyone that's sort of come forward and relayed stories to me in a similar vein as to what happened to them when they were at the Erie County Holding Center, where they were deprived of their medications, basic human necessities, necessary food and sustenance, the psychological warfare that sometimes takes place in there, where guards will withhold medications from inmates who they don't like or who are, quote unquote, giving them a hard time. So from that end, that seems to be something that takes place behind those walls as a matter of business. Thankfully, it doesn't necessarily have quite the tragic outcome that we're dealing with in terms of India Cummings, but people are severely affected the rest of their lives from some of the experiences that take place to them at the Erie County Holding Center.
Well, I know that I've had a lot of calls as the head of Build a Buffalo Incorporated, a civil rights organization. We've had a lot of calls about this, and it certainly has resonated in the community, and all eyes are on this case. So we certainly wish you the best in your pursuits. We certainly do. It's just a very moving and terrible situation. So with that, we're going to, want everyone to sort of stay tuned. We'll be right back after this short break and continue with more questions of our attorney.
Hi there, I'm Bob LaValle. I'm a Unitarian Universalist seminarian on my way to becoming a minister. I'm here as an act of faith, as a Unitarian Universalist. I'm standing on the side of love here in front of Erie County Holding Center to say that Black Lives Matter. I'm here because I knew sooner or later the national story about the new Jim Crow, the mass incarceration system would eventually come to Buffalo. And here it is. I mean, it's already here, but now we see its boldest demonstration, the death of India Cummings. So as a citizen of Buffalo, born and raised here, I'm here to call for the right thing to happen, which is a full investigation into what happened, a full and independent investigation into what happened. That means it can't be anybody involved in Erie County. It can't be the DA. It certainly can't be the Sheriff's Department.
Hey, hey, ho, ho, Sheriff Howard has got to go. Hey, hey, ho, ho, Sheriff Howard has got to go. Hey, hey.
Welcome back again. My name is Charlie H. Fisher III, and I'm your host for today. Again, we're talking about justice for India with our attorney, Matthew Albert, who's here telling India's story on the Advocator show today. Just, counsel, I got some more questions here. Did she call the police herself for help, if you know?
She did. On February 1st, she was running from neighbor to neighbor, acting in a frantic manner, if you will. She was praying. Something was clearly amiss, according to the neighbors. And then India ultimately called the police, saying she was short of breath and asked for help. According to police reports and allegations, when police arrived, India then stole somebody's vehicle and led the police on a high chase pursuit, where she ultimately crashed the vehicle. So we're in the process of vetting that story. We're investigating not just what happened at the jail, but just especially for the family's benefit. We really want to take a look also at the weeks and even months leading up to February 1st, just to see what could have possibly triggered the deterioration of India's mental state, which I think is fair to say was clearly taking place well before she actually arrived at the holding center, to the point where that was not a place she should have ever gone to originally. She should have gone to a hospital.
Has she ever been diagnosed with an emotional disorder?
No, and that's something that, again, is one of the perplexing aspects of this matter. Is this is not a girl that had any sort of, well, for one, criminal history, or for two, any sort of mental health history, or any sort of notable mental health history, which would have necessarily explained what was taking place on February 1st.
Was she conscious or unconscious when she arrived at the hospital?
On February 17th,
Yes.
we're talking about,
Yes.
She was brain dead. So what Erie County spokespeople or the spokesperson for the Sheriff's Department are calling a medical event, therefore she was transferred to the hospital, is completely inaccurate. India was dead by the time that she left the jail. She had no brain activity whatsoever, and that never changed. She was functionally brain dead and had irreversible brain damage, among other injuries, but that was by the time that she left the holding center and arrived at the hospital. She never regained consciousness whatsoever. So for Sheriff Howard and staff to say, oh, well, she suffered a medical event, something we couldn't handle, so then we transported her to Buffalo General, and then it was whatever happened, we don't know. That's disingenuous in the sense that they knew what condition she was in, and they knew that basically she had died at the holding center, and then by the time she got to Buffalo General, it was too late. There was nothing anybody could do for her at that point.
So that India's medical condition was not something that they were very specific about. It was just a medical event.
Right, and to that end, Tawana Wyatt, India's mother, had been calling the holding center on a daily basis. This was before retaining me. She was supposed to be coordinating with a social worker that was supposed to be overseeing India, and it was one unreturned phone call after another, after another, after another. That went all the way through India's demise and all the way to the time that Ms. Wyatt was trying to get her daughter's body or remains transferred back to Rochester that she could have a proper burial. So the sheriff's department, the jail, has been unnaturally silent, if you will, throughout these proceedings.
Now, the results of an autopsy, toxicology, and all these reports haven't come back yet, but from what you understand, what were the injuries that you sustained, i.e. broken bones or others?
Sure. So what we do know, just from speaking with hospital personnel, is that India had a litany of injuries. Some were consistent with possible abuse, namely a broken arm, broken ribs. Other injuries were consistent with severe neglect, such as very low kidney function, severe dehydration. So I think it's, while obviously we don't have all the answers yet, just based on those facts, I mean, it was as if she hadn't had anything to eat or drink within that 2 or 3 week period she was at the holding center. That's consistent with anecdotal evidence that we've come up with from inmates that were housed with India. And it was the inmates that were concerned about India's well-being and her mental state. And it was them that were telling the deputies, she needs medical, she needs medical. And it was the deputies that completely disregarded what was going on, which obviously which raises the question, why is it that inmates not on the county dime were so much more concerned about India's well-being than the paid professionals who were in charge of her custody and care? Now,
Counselor, I know that some of these reports, tests have to come back, but has there an official cause of death, or that's going to be based on the autopsy itself?
That's still pending as well. The autopsy was done at this point about a couple weeks ago, give or take. So I think, I don't know why they haven't released the results as of yet, but no, I guess at this point there is no official cause of death.
And the sheriff is in a statement saying that he is satisfied with the level of care that she received while in custody.
Yes, I believe the direct quote was comfortable. He's comfortable with the level of care that India received, which I guess begs the question, especially given the injuries that I've just itemized, what would make him uncomfortable?
The news media made a claim on national television this week that India had been using synthetic marijuana, which was contributed to her irrational behavior. Do you know if India had this drug in her system when she arrived at the hospital?
I don't. I doubt it would have been in her system when she was at the hospital, given that that was February 17th when she arrived at the hospital. February 1st was when she went to the holding center. So I don't know if it would have been in her system. What the news media is sort of relaying as fact is basically information put out there by sheriff spokespeople and things to that effect. There does seem to be some testimony from people in her neighborhood that she may have ingested some synthetic marijuana, but at this point that's not necessarily confirmed, nor do I think that's necessarily at all related to, it might have been related to her actions on February 1st, but as we move a little further away from February 1st to 2nd, February 3rd, I don't think it would explain her continued emotional and mental decline that was taking place while she was at the holding center.
It's a stunning matter. And clearly, in the communities of Rochester and Buffalo, New York, many people have been following this with great interest. We'll be right back after this short break.
We're coming to a crossroads here because this police state just keeps going and going, and it's unchecked. And what do they do in there when something like this happens? All they know is corruption and brutality. So they double down, they triple down. I bet you there are deputies in there, and I know actually, I've spoken to retired deputies who tell me everything that goes on in there. And there's deputies in there right now, I bet, that want to come forward, that want to speak to what happened to India. Why don't they do it? And this isn't an excuse, because at some point you've got to make a sacrifice yourself when it comes to what's right and what's wrong. But why don't they? Because that's career suicide, okay? But killing someone is not. Right. What kind of environment have we fostered in there? Just think about the madness, all right? In other countries around the world, developed nations, look at America and laugh at this point. They look at all the deaths, which by the way aren't tabulated. Everything else is tabulated, but all the deaths caused by police in this country are not, all right? And they look at it, and they look at the videos coming out with people with their hands up in the air and so forth, and they laugh at us, not because it's funny, but these crazy Americans It's got to get better. And it's got to start with communities coming together such as this. And it's got to start with people thinking about what could they do to help. Here's my idea, which I'm going to start with. As I said, all these different people that have been coming forward to me, what we're going to start doing, whether it's related to India's case or not, we're going to start taking these signed sworn affidavits from them, forwarding everything to the DOJ. And we need other lawyers to step up too. And with that in mind, I've spoken to 2 lawyers recently from Rochester, more than willing to help. Okay, through tragedy sometimes comes community. India's life mattered, we know that. Okay, but it's up to us now to be her voice.
Welcome back again. My name is Charlie H. Fisher III. I'm your host for today. Again, we're talking about justice for India with their attorney Matthew Albert, who's telling India's story on the Advocator show today. Counselor, what is the family saying about all of this? I know your duty is to represent the family in this matter. What are they saying? I know you mentioned about Mrs. Watt's concern, but what is the family's position on this?
Well, again, they've seen everything that I've seen and stated, and in fact even more, some things that we can't necessarily air at this point. So they're confident, I guess, that what happened was completely avoidable, should have been avoided, should have never happened, and that there were serious errors, if not crimes, that led to India suffering the way she did, and then ultimately passing away a couple weeks ago. So with that in mind, the family is devastated as one could imagine. India was very much beloved, but at the same time, they're staying as strong as they possibly can be and channeling their emotions towards fighting and getting these answers. They want these answers more than anybody, and that's why what we're doing is not just kind of sitting back and waiting for the county to turn over their evidence and things to that effect, but we're trying to take a proactive approach and recruit people from the jail that were housed with India, people that could provide independent evidence, if you will, as to what took place with her. So we are basically on a hunt to get all these answers because we know that the county is, A, probably not going to give us accurate or truthful answers, and B, they're not going to be giving them anytime soon either.
Well, I see that you use social media
Right.
To gain awareness of this matter. Why that avenue? Why social media?
It might be somewhat of an unconventional method, but first of all, obviously, anything that I do along those lines, I'm working hand in hand with the client. But basically, I guess if you one of the sayings that I use is, every action having an equal and opposite reaction, and I relate that to the county wants nothing more, or Tim Howard wants nothing more than for an instance like this to be kept in the dark. So the best thing that we could do in these instances is expose these matters to the light, so that way people could understand what really took place here, and then the steps could be taken by the community involved to ensure that something like this never happens again. So basically, when it comes to social media, that's one place where we control, obviously, that medium, and we could make sure that things aren't diluted, dumbed down, but we could put out, and everything, not just a one-sided version of events. We're only putting forward things that we could prove, things that we know, and we're doing it in such a manner so that people could understand what's going on. It's their community, so we want people to understand what's going on behind those walls at the jail.
Has any witness come forth yet from the Erie County
Yes.
Holding Center? I know you alluded to inmates.
Not just one.
But specifically, okay, so staff and inmates, are you hopeful that more will come?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in this case, the more the merrier, but yes, we are consulting with numerous individuals who have firsthand knowledge as to what took place with India.
I understand that you spoke at a rally yesterday in front of the Holding Center. Tell me a little bit about this.
Sure. There was a rally organized by the Buffalo Anti-Racism Coalition, they invited me to speak, which I graciously accepted. And basically, there were a lot of different people from different organizations there, and the common denominator, I guess, is everyone, stood for the proposition that what happened to India was devastating, but it makes it even more outrageous given the fact that that jail is under federal oversight. And basically, the feds had to step in because of the alarming death rate and the amount of suffering, unnecessary suffering that goes on behind those walls. So with all that, with the sordid and tragic history of the holding center being what it is, how could nothing have changed? despite millions and millions and millions of litigation between the federal government and the Erie County Holding Center. So that was a common and pervasive theme, and that leads us to really one conclusion, and that is that the individual or sheriff in charge of the Erie County Holding Center, Tim Howard, has to go. And that was certainly a viewpoint held by, I would say, everybody that was in attendance at yesterday's rally.
Now, are there other rallies or benefits planned in the future?
Not as of yet, but one thing that's come about through this is, through tragedy sometimes comes community. And I personally have met a lot of individuals from different organizations that want to support India, support her cause, but not even just her. It's bigger than that. They want to support, all the individuals behind the walls at the holding center that have been beaten, brutalized, or had their medications withheld from them. So with that in mind, there are, as I stated, a lot of different community organizations, grassroots groups, and now it's just a question of finding the best way to facilitate those individuals, to network, so that we can plan the next move going forward, I guess, in terms of the rallies, in terms of the protests, in terms of getting the word out and standing in solidarity with this cause.
Well, it's a myriad of issues when you start talking about the holding center, the sheriff, the law for the city, the state, the federal level, and the family's issues. It's a very complex, very litigious matter.
Right. It's very layered. There's a lot of different aspects. From obviously what happened to India is completely tragic, but I guess, when we're looking at the bigger picture, these are things that have in some way, shape, or form happened before at the holding center in terms of individuals being mistreated. And while India's life obviously matters and mattered, but now she can't speak, and it's up to us to be her voice going forward. And for her death to really mean something, her legacy to really mean something, this has to be the end. This has to be where everyone kind of puts their foot down and says enough is enough, and that whether someone's accused of a crime, convicted of a crime, whatever the case may be, there's absolutely no reason for them to be deprived of their basic human rights, which is what's going on behind those walls at the holding center.
Now, then, what's next for the case, and what would you like to say, or is there anything else you'd like to say to the viewing audience in reference to this? What's next?
Well, what's next in the case there's a lot of steps. But again, we're in the information gathering, evidence collecting stage of our investigation. We are obtaining evidence. If anybody has their own stories that they want to relay that based upon what they saw or what they've endured at the holding center, they're more than welcome to contact me. We're taking statements from individuals. We're doing that whether or not they were there at the same time India was there, but just to kind of put together a comprehensive overview as to what is in fact and all the violations that are taking place at the holding center. And in terms of what I'd like to say to so that's part of what we're doing now. I mean, it's a lengthy process. These cases aren't settled overnight, or they're not dealt with overnight either. We're setting up an estate on India's behalf so that we could pursue a claim. We're going to be serving a notice of claim, and then ultimately we're going to be leading to a wrongful death suit.
Well, we're really out of time now, but certainly we thank you and taking time out of your schedule to be a guest on the Advocator show, sharing India Cummings' story with us. Thanks for the viewing audience for tuning in to the Advocator, and to view other episodes of the Advocator show, go to our website. And that's again www.latelucyproductions.com. Thanks again. Be sure to watch us again next week.